Shalom, and thank you for joining me to explore yet another Parsha in Sefer Bereshit. Today's Parsha is Parashat Vayishlach, and one of the stories in this Parsha is definitely something that we all will struggle with when we will read it. It's the Parsha of Dina, the story of Dina that was taken by Shchem, and she obviously suffered from him, and this entire story, this story that seems and sounds like rape, but then we will compare it to another story in Tanakh, and we will try to see perhaps there is maybe another way to look at it. What we're going to do today, which will be a little bit maybe different than any other shiur that we gave in previously, is that I will try to suggest to you few different options of how our sages read the story with all these difficulties, and what are the lessons and the messages that they try to convey to the audience of their time and for eternity. So in order to do so and to deal with such a loaded issue, let's try to read the narrative itself, let's ask a few questions, and then we will try to explore our sages' suggestions regarding the right reading and the right lessons that we can read from that narrative. So, with such an introduction, let's read the narrative itself. ותצא דינה בת לאה, אשר ילדה ליעקב, לראות בבנות הארץ. So Dina, the daughter of Leah, who gave birth to Yaakov, she went out to see the girls of the land. Obviously, there are a few questions that comes up when we read the first pasuk. By the way, we're not going to deal with all the questions. I'm just going to bring them to the surface so we can discuss them maybe later. The first question that we have is, what does it mean Dina bat Leah? It should say ותצא Dina, or just to leave it as Dina and we know exactly who is Dina, or to say ותצא Dina bat Leah ויעקב, the daughter of Leah and Yaakov. What does it mean Dina, the daughter of Leah, and Leah gave birth to Dina to Yaakov? It's a little clumsy. The language is a little different. And then, לראות בבנות הארץ. So what does that mean that she went to see the girls of the land? So you can definitely say, look, she has 11 more siblings, and they are all boys. So obviously she would like to hang out with some girls. But לראות בבנות הארץ, it seems to be a very interesting phrase, to see the daughters of the land. Second verse, וירא אותה שכם בן חמור החיבי נשיא הארץ. So Shchem, the son of Hamor, saw her, and he was נשיא הארץ. Shchem ben Hamor החיבי, he was the son of the president of this territory. As we all know, like every other land in the ancient times, it was divided to different territories. Each region, each territory was headed by a president or a governor and his tribe, and basically no one else could basically infiltrate that territory unless that president gives permission for that person to join the territory, the tribe, or the region. So Shchem ben Hamor החיבי sees Dina, ויקח אותה, and he took her, וישכב אותה, and he slept with her, ויעניה, and he afflicted her. Now, the sequence of actions is also a bit strange. ויקח אותה, לקחת, to take, can be, in a way, can be a very forceful expression, to take something. But the problem is that we know that the makor, the source for marriage in the Torah is ki yikach ish isha. The language is the same, lakachat, to take. And there we definitely do not speak about force or to force someone into marriage. So we start with vayikach ota, and then vayishkav ota, and then he slept with her. But only the last verb is vaya'anea, and he afflicted her, which is a bit strange. Because if it's just simple action of rape, it should say, וירא אותה שכם בן חמור אחיבי נשיא הארץ, and Shchem ben Hamor אחיבי, the president of the region, saw her, and he afflicted her, and stop. What does it mean? And he took her, slept with her, and then only after that he afflicted her. And then, the third verse, ותדבק נפשו בדינה בת יעקב. I don't understand. First it says that his soul, nefesh, nafsho, attached itself, glued himself to Dina. Now we are talking about, here we are talking only about physical things. He took her, he slept with her, he afflicted her. And now you're talking about some kind of a spiritual component of nafsho. His soul is attached to Dina. And what Dina? In first verse we says Dina bat Leah, Dina the daughter of Leah. And now in verse 3 we said Dina bat Yaakov, Dina the daughter of Yaakov. What's wrong with Leah? Where is Leah? Vayehav et hanehara. He loves the girl. He really fell in love with Dina. Vayedaber al lev hanehara. And he speaks to her heart, probably trying to convince her to marry him, which is interesting. We know that even in our laws, in the Torah laws, if there is a rape, then if the girl or her father do not object, the rapist must marry her. It's not his discretion. Here you see that she doesn't want, and he tries his best to marry her. ויאמר שכם אל חמור אביו לאמור, קח לי את הילדה הזאת לאישה. I would like to marry her. Which, by the way, another question, you see that there is a change between the way the narrative describes Dina. Sometimes it's Dina bat Leah, Dina the daughter of Leah, then Dina bat Yaakov, Dina the daughter of Yaakov, then it says Na'ara, which means a young girl, and then it says Yalda, which means a little girl. So that's until Pasuk Dalet. So if I will just pause here for a second, obviously we have many questions, we're not going to deal with all of them today, but for our purposes, we see that the relationship between Shchem and Dina are complicated. They begin with Vayikach ota, and then if you look at Pasuk Daled, at verse 4, it says, Kach li ta yalda azot leisha, which means take this girl for me for a wife. So Kach is for a wife, but he sleeps with her, maybe against her will, and Vaya'anea, he afflicted her. But then he wants to marry her, and we still don't hear even one sound from Dina. Does she want it? Does she want to marry Shchem? Does she want to stay with him? Does she want to go home? We have no idea what exactly Dina's thoughts are. So as the readers, we are perplexed. We see that the guy fell in love with her, and we don't know what's going on with Dina. And then Pasuk Hey, verse Hey, ויעקב שמע כי טימא את דינה ביתו. Now we move to another thing. Bito, his daughter. Yaakov looks at Dina as his own daughter, not Dina bat Leah. And he heard that Dina was tum'ah, metumet, kitime, which means she was, I would say, contaminated by Shchem. ובניו היו את מקנהו בשדה. Yaakov's children were in the field. והחריש יעקב עד בואם. And Yaakov was silent until his children came. And then, ויצא חמור אבי שכם אל יעקב לדבר איתו. Hamor, the father of Shchem, went to Yaakov in order to speak to him. I would like for your daughter Dina to marry my son. ובני יעקב באו מן השדה כשומעם, so the children of Yaakov came after they heard, they came back from the field, ויתעצבו האנשים, and they were very sad, ויחר להם מאוד, and they had rage, they were angry, כי נבלה עשה בישראל. There was a disgrace that was done among the Jewish people, among the family of Yaakov, לשכב את בת יעקב, to sleep with a daughter of Yaakov. וכן לא יעשה. And it shouldn't be done anywhere, not only among us. Also, when you look at this pasuk, you see something very interesting. It says, Bnei Yaakov, that's the way that verse 7 begins, the children of Yaakov. Then there is a change, anashim, people, men. And then the word nevala, disgrace, despicable action took place among our family, וכן לא יעשה, which means what? It seems to be that generally speaking, things like that are not done. And therefore we need to react. So we can go on and on about questions about that narrative. But there is one question that I didn't ask yet, which really I didn't want to ask. When you have a story like that, it seems to be that there is one person who is missing here, about her thoughts, about what did she have in mind, and that's Dina. Dina is, as we say, shketa. She is totally quiet. We don't know anything about her. We don't know what exactly happened between Dina and Shchem. It's pretty ambiguous. We know that Yaakov and his children are upset, are sad, and then later on we also know the story that the children of Yaakov, at least Shimon and Levi, did something that basically ended that story. And they were criticized by Yaakov. But still, we are not sure what exactly happened here in that story. So our sages ask the same questions, and I would like to learn with you, to study with you, some of their perspectives, with the complexity and the challenge that they will pose for us, especially in the 21st century. In Bereshit Rabbah, which is an ancient midrash that was composed in Israel around the 5th century, probably, maybe a little bit later, but it's an early midrash. It says the following. You know what? I'll move to source number 3, I would like you to see the pasuk. First the pasuk and then the midrash. The verse says the following, Vayakom balayla hu. That's when Yaakov is returning to the land of Israel and he's preparing to meet his brother, his Esav. So he woke up at that night, Vayikach et shtei nashav, he took 2 of his wives, ve'et shtei shifchotav, and 2 of his maidservants, which is Bila and Zilpa. So he took Rachel and Leah, these 2 wives, and the 2 maidservants, ve'et 11 ילדיו, ויעבור את מעבר יבוק. And he took 11 of his children, and then he crossed the river. Just one second, we have a problem. What's the problem? How many kids Yaakov has at that time? 12, not 11. Who is missing? So now, let's see the midrash. The midrash says, Vayakom balayla hu, he quotes the pasuk, and he woke up at that night and he took 2 of his wife and 2 of his maidservants and 11 of his children. Vedina eichan hi. Where is Dina? What, did she disappear? Obviously she was there, so why isn't she counted? Says the midrash, Netana bateiva vena'al befanea. Yaakov hid Dina in a box. So when he crossed the river into the land of Israel, he says, I know I'm going to meet Esav. I don't want him to see Dina. Why? We'll see in a second. But basically Dina was there, but she was not counted because he hid her in a box. Okay. Amar. So Yaakov says, Harasha hazeh, this evil guy, my brother, Esav, eino ramahi. He's a bit arrogant person, and also he looks at women in not the best way. שלא יתלה עיניו ויראה אותה ויקח אותה ממני. I'm afraid that he will fall in love with Dina, with my daughter, and he will take her away from me. Okay, if you will stop here, I would say, so what do you want from Yaakov? He is a good Abba, he's a good father, he's a good daddy, and he wants to keep his daughter safe. He doesn't want her to marry his brother Esav, who wants to kill him. So it makes sense. So what's wrong with it? What's the problem? Ravuna b'shem Rabbi Abba, Kohen bar de la Amar. Listen to what the Midrash has to say. Amar lo HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Hashem says to Yaakov, Lamas mere'ehu chased. That's a pasuk in Iyov, in Job. What does that mean? Lamas is to steal or to prevent. Manata, you prevented mere'acha, from your friend, from your brother, chesed. What does that mean? Manata chazdach min achuch, de'ilu itnasivat legavra lo zinta. This is an incredible midrash. Dina's rape was a punishment to Yaakov. Yaakov prevented Esav from marrying Dina because he hid her in the box. Therefore, Dina will suffer as a punishment to Yaakov. Lo bikashta le'asiya lemahul, harei niset le'arel. You didn't want her to marry Esav, who was circumcised like you. She's going to marry, or she's going to be afflicted by whom? By Shchem, who was not circumcised when he was with her the first time. Lo bikashta le'asiya derech heter. You didn't want her to marry Esav, which will be in a normal way. Arei niset derech isur, hada udichtiv vatetze Dina bat Leah. This is an incredible midrash, and I'm going to say a few things now in order to explain the midrash. The question, the starting point that the midrash begins his discussion is, how come that something like that happened? That's the question of the midrash. How come that the Dina, the daughter of Yaakov, is being, I would say, kidnapped, going through a terrible affliction, and then she ends up with Shchem? This is just such not a good story. So the Midrash is asking a question, what exactly is going on here? What's the reason for something like that to happen, which is a very difficult question to answer? And the Midrash suggests that the one to be blamed is Yaakov. Yaakov could prevent it. He could have prevented it by what? By giving Dina to Esav. Esav is your brother. Esav is circumcised. Yes, we know. Esav does not like you. But you know what? We also know that the end of the story is that Esav and Yaakov were basically, they somehow appeased each other. They were not best friends, but they could. Can you imagine our Jewish history? If Esav was married to Dina and Yaakov was his brother and father-in-law, sounds maybe weird, but could happen in ancient times. And Esav would be part of Yaakov's family and perhaps would be influenced by Dina, by Yaakov, by the children of Yaakov, which means the Midrash is saying something horrific. You prevented kindness from Esav. You were able to give him a rope that he could hold on, and you could basically bring him into your family. And instead of doing that, now you will be punished, and one of your children, Dina, will be basically afflicted by Shchem. This is the pasuk from Iyov, Lamas mere'ehu chased. You prevented from your friend chesed, kindness, v'yirat Shaddai azov, and you left the fear of God, which means Yaakov thought that he's doing the right thing. But by doing so, he showed that he does not have the fear of God. Because if he would trust God, that God will help Dina to influence Esav. Now, before we go to source number 5, let's just hold on here. Because what the Rabbi suggested is something that brings so many questions. If you want to punish Yaakov for preventing this chesed from Esav, this kindness from Esav, punish Yaakov. Make him sick, make him lose his money, make him, suffer from Esav. Why do you punish Dina? And we all understand when our kids are not well, we also suffer. But here, Yaakov was the one. Dina has nothing, no say whatsoever who she wants to marry. We know ancient times, she really had no say. So why do you punish Dina for Yaakov? That's question number one. And the second question, this is not so much of a question, but it's more of an amazement, is that the Midrash feels that if Esav would marry Dina, our history, and obviously our present and future time, will be totally different. Yaakov will do a tremendous kindness with Esav, and will change history. And Yaakov, because he did not believe in his own children, or he couldn't fathom the fact that Esav could be a good guy, could be a good brother, could be really joining forces with him and pushing humanity to the right place, he missed a tremendous opportunity in history. And because of that, not only Dina suffers, but all of us. This is a heavy accusation against Yaakov. And the Midrash is not afraid to say that. So we now look at the narrative itself. And obviously we are not solving all the questions that we asked, but we, in a way, we see the story of Dina as a predetermined story. Meaning when Dina went out, she is not to be blamed. It was already predestined that she will fall into Shchem's hands. And then the story will unfold. Because it's Yaakov to be blamed. Dina is blameless. It's all Yaakov's fault. I would like just to go again to the language of the Midrash. The language of the Midrash is horrific. He says, Amar lo HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Shchem says to Yaakov, Lamas mere'ehu chesed, manata mere'acha chesed. You prevented your friend, your brother, chesed. Manata chazdach min achuch. De'ilu itnasavit legavra lo zinta. However, I would like to suggest yet another reading in this Midrash, which will not be that pleasant, and to say that it's true, most of the blame goes on Yaakov, but Dina is not blameless, according to the Midrash. Because the Midrash says, Ilu itnasivat legavra, if Dina would have been married now, she would not go and look for those girls of the land, and she will not be kidnapped or taken by Shchem, which means Dina had to be watched. And because you just hid her in the box, thinking that now she is safe, she would have been safer if she would be married. And then, if that's a reading in the Midrash criticizes what? Yaakov for not marrying Dina in a way which will, when you know anything about the 5th century and 6th century, what I will call laws of modesty and perspective on women, women had to be married. And if they are not married, it's a recipe for disaster. And therefore the Midrash, in our second suggestion in terms of how to read the Midrash, we can say that our sages basically blamed Yaakov for not marrying off Dina quicker, faster, before she had too much time on her hands and she was still single, and then look at the troubles she ended up with. Whatever suggestion we go with, obviously it's not that comfortable for us, especially the 21st century, but I feel that we can share this Midrash and show how can we read it in two ways. So again, first way is to basically full accusation, all blame goes on Yaakov, Dina is blameless. Second is 95% goes on Yaakov, but there is a 5% on Dina that she should have known not to go out there by herself as a single girl. Midrash, Rabbah, 5th century. a different perspective. A different perspective in Bereshit Rabbah again. Rabbi Yehuda Rabbi Simon Patach. So Rabbi Yehuda, the son of Shimon, made an introduction to the following verse from Mishlei, from Proverbs. Al tithalel biyom achar. King Solomon, the wisest person on earth, says, do not glorify yourself today because you don't know what will be tomorrow. Don't be so sure about yourself. A, be humble, and B, the fact that today you are successful does not mean that tomorrow you will be successful. There are no guarantees. Nothing continues forever. Do not over-glorify yourself today. What this has anything to do with Yaakov? Says the Midrash. Ve'at amart, and you said, Yaakov, ve'anta b'tzidkati b'yom achar. It's interesting. It says what? Yaakov says to Lavan, when they had this kind of negotiation of what is the flock that belongs to Lavan and what the flock that belongs to Yaakov. So Yaakov says to Lavan, give me all the flock that you don't want, and then ve'anta b'tzidkati b'yom achar. I will show you how righteous I am and how pious I am tomorrow, because tomorrow you will see that I did not take anything from you. It's all mine. Says the Midrash, this statement that I'll show you, Lavan, how righteous I am tomorrow, it was a wrong statement. It showed haughtiness. Yaakov was arrogant at that moment, and therefore, machar bitcha yotzet umit'ana hada udichtiv atetze Dina. This is an incredible midrash. Again, Bereshit Rabbah looks at the story of Dina, and he has one person to mostly blame or to only blame, which is Yaakov. If the first midrash blamed Yaakov for preventing chesed from his own brother and has the ability to change history, this midrash says, Yaakov, you are too sure about yourself. You think you have everything under control. You think that you lead, you navigate, you are doing everything that you plan will happen exactly the way you want it. You know what will happen tomorrow? Tomorrow your daughter will go out and she will be afflicted to show you, don't be that sure of yourself. Again, this is a hard midrash to digest, because immediately the question comes up, you want to punish Yaakov? Punish Yaakov. Make that tomorrow Yaakov would lose half of his flock because of a disease, because of poison. Show him that he cannot be so sure about his might. But why do you want to punish Dina? But again, I cannot answer that question. I don't think anyone can answer that question. It's an enigma. I don't know. However, I think that there is a tremendous lesson here. First, again, the Midrash is not afraid to say to Yaakov, you were not correct. Your decision was wrong. You showed too much trust or too much feeling of confidence. And I want to show you that you are still vulnerable. No one can be sure of himself. That's A. B, it reminds us what we learned many weeks ago about the Akedah, about binding of Isaac. That we showed that one of the interpretations, Rashbam, Rashi's grandson, who basically says what? He says that one of the ideas or the reasons for the Akedah of binding of Isaac was what? Too much confidence on Abraham's side. When he made the treaty with Avimelech, with the king of Plishtim, and he says to him, I'm not going to touch you, your descendants, for 7 generations. And God was very upset. God says to him, since when you are so sure that this is your land, that you can give it? We have the same idea, the same method, the same theme. You cannot be so sure, because when you are so sure, you feel that you are not vulnerable. If you are not vulnerable, you are not tested anymore. Says the Midrash Yaakov, this is not the right time to feel so comfortable with yourself. Life has many more challenges. And the next challenge is tomorrow. So again, Dina is blameless. Yaakov is the one to be blamed. Still, is that fair or not fair? We obviously cannot answer the question. But we can definitely say that Dina is blameless. So that's the second/third suggestion of the sages. But now, we have a different take. Again, a quote from Bereshit Rabbah, and Rashi, from the 11th century in France, he brings this midrash. And he addresses the question that we asked at the beginning of the shiur, the beginning of the class, where it says, Vatetze Dina bat Leah. And Dina, the daughter of Leah. And we says, she's the daughter of Yaakov. Says Rashi, Bat Leah velo bat Yaakov, she's not Yaakov's daughter? Ela al shem yetziata nikret bat Leah. She's named bat Leah because she went out. Vatetze, she went out. So what? שאף היא יצאנית הייתה, שנאמר ותצא לאה לקראתו, ועליה משלו המשל כאימה כביתה. I will do my best to explain this Rashi and this Midrash. Oh, sorry. This Midrash basically says two horrific things. He picks on two things in that pasuk, Vatetze, and she went out, and the fact that she is called Dina bat Leah. Why Dina bat Leah and not bat Yaakov? So the Midrash says, because she was immodest. Exactly like her mother. How do we know that Leah was immodest? That she didn't act in a modest way? Because, if you remember, in last week's Parsha, when the Torah talked about Yaakov building his family, we know that one time Reuven brought some kind of flowers that, according to probably ancient cultures, helped fertility, and Rachel wanted them because she had no kids. And Leah says to her, okay, if I'll give you those flowers, you need to give me your night with Yaakov. And Rachel agreed, which is also open up many, many questions, not for today. And when Yaakov came back from the field, from walking, Leah went out from her tent and says to Yaakov, Elai tavo, you are with me tonight. And Chazal, our sages looked at that in not exactly a favorable way. And they said, this is not the way it should go. You should do it privately, you shouldn't go out, maybe you need to send a message. This is just not a proper way. Even though Leah wanted to be with Yaakov in order to have another child, in order to complete the 12 tribes. But this Midrash ignores it and basically criticizes Leah for doing so. And then Dina was like her mother. So she also went out. And by going out does not mean just to hang out with girls, but rather to hang out and maybe to be viewed by men. So basically, this Midrash creates an atmosphere, an environment of almost blaming the victim, which means because Dina went out and she quote-unquote put herself out there, no surprise that Shchem, who is the son of the president of the country, of the region, he can do whatever he wants because he's in control, so he can take her. So, in a way, this Midrash, aggravates us. How can you say such a thing? It's so hard to understand. How can they criticize Leah for what she did, especially when we know that after that night she was pregnant, and the child that was born from that pregnancy was Issachar. Yesh Sachar, there is reward for what she did. Meaning God agreed with it. So why to criticize her? But still, our sages who looked in such a deep view and look at things, they said, yes, you can take an action and divide it. Yes, there are good parts in it, but there was another way. So what's the criticism on Dina? Is that she shouldn't go out. She should stay at home. Now, we can talk about the 11th century in France and about laws of modesty. We can compare it to what was going on in the Islamic countries. But definitely there is a gisha, there is an attitude there that a woman should stay home and shouldn't go out. So when you read this midrash, and especially when Rashi in the 11th century quotes Dafka, specifically this midrash, and not the other two that I just quoted, definitely you can see that there is a megama, that there is an approach, that there is an agenda that Rashi wants to push. It's better for her to stay home. And by the way, you can find it in this midrash, in Midrash Tanchuma, which is probably 8th or 9th century, or maybe 7th to 8th, it depends. Midrash Tanchuma says also something that it's so foreign to us in a way, but take a look at what the midrash says. Im hirbeta regel v'ayta yotza lashuk, if a woman starts going out and she goes to the marketplace, sof ba lidei kilkul lidei znut, so she will end up not in a good place. And how do we know that? Kach ata motze bedina bat Yaakov. Prime example is Dina. כל זמן שהייתה יושבת בבית, לא נתקלקלה בעבירה. All the time that she would sit at home, nothing happened to her. כיוון שיצאה לשוק, she went to the marketplace, גרמה לעצמה. This is such a horrific language. She caused herself לבוא לידי כלכלה. This is really blaming the victim, but we need to say something here. If Midrash Tanchuma was composed around the 8th century, obviously the reference will be the Islamic countries. In the Islamic countries, and if you read part of the stories with Muhammad and the other leaders of the Islamic religion, you read, and this is an interesting part, and if someone would like to elaborate on it, Professor Avram Grossman in his book Hasidot Umordot, Pious Women and Rebellious Women, speaks about it, and it's around, I think, page 190 something. Basically says, he brings documents of stories of women that basically Muhammad decided for them that they need to stay home and they shouldn't leave the house, to the extent that there is a story that he brings in that book, that a woman, her husband left and he told her, do not leave the room. And then she was on the 2nd floor, and on the 1st floor her father was sick. And she wanted to see her father, so she sent a messenger to Muhammad to ask him, can she go downstairs? Because her husband told her not to leave the room. And Muhammad says, don't do it, even to visit your father. And then her father got really sick, and she went ahead and sent another messenger, and she said, my father is really sick, should I go downstairs? He says to her, no. And then the father died, and she asked, can she go to the funeral? And he said, no. Do exactly what your husband told you, and stay in your room. And after the funeral, Muhammad sent the messenger to tell her, because she did what her husband told her, and because she kept her modesty, she will be rewarded with many children, and they will be righteous. Now, again, what's the authenticity of the story? How much? But we do know that the Midrash itself also does not operate in an isolated atmosphere, in an isolated environment. There is reciprocity between cultures. And it perhaps that this Midrash talks from a very rigid perspective on modesty. Basically trying to approach women, not Dina, basically use the story of Dina in order to show, look, you leave the house, who knows where you end up with. So it might be a criticism on Dina, and basically blaming her, blaming the victim, or alternatively, just using the story in order to send a message. Which obviously, again, as I said before, for the 21st century ears, it's very hard to understand. But don't judge the Midrash. We don't live in the 8th century. And the Midrash dared to deal with a question which is very difficult. How come that something like that took place? Source number 8. אל תתהלל ביום מחר כי לא תדע מה ילד יום. Don't be too sure about yourself today, because you will not know what will be tomorrow. Which also relates not only to the previous midrash, but also to this midrash. Some kind of a message. Even if you went out today and nothing happened to you, you cannot be sure about tomorrow. If that's true, take a look on source number 9, which I would like to suggest that perhaps can put a totally different perspective on the story of Dina. This is the story of Amnon and Tamar. Amnon was David's son, one of his children, and Tamar was his half-sister, or step-sister, I will call it like that. Amnon fell in love with Tamar, and he wanted to be with her, and he didn't know how to do it. So he received an ill advice, that he should pretend to be sick, and he should ask that Tamar will come and bake for him something. And then, when they will be in the room by themselves, so he can do whatever he conspired to do. But take a look at the psukim. ותגש אליו לאכול, so she prepared some food for him and she brings it to him. ויחזק בה. He basically grabbed her. ויאמר לה, and he told her, בואי שכבי עמי אחותי. Come and sleep with me, my sister. Terrible. ותאמר לו. And she said to him, just imagine the drama. He's grabbing her hand, and she definitely cannot move, and she says to him, אחי, אל אחי, please my brother, אל תענני, do not afflict me. כי לא יעשה כן בישראל. Do you hear from the first narrative, the first source? ויעניה, ולא יעשה כן, כי נבלה עשה בישראל. אל תענני, please do not afflict me. כי לא יעשה כן בישראל. It's not appropriate, it's not proper to do something like that among our nation. אל תעשה את הנבלה הזאת. Please do not do this despicable act. ואני, אנה הוליכת חרפתי? Where would I go with this shanda, with this disgrace? If you're going to sleep with me, I'm off your sister, it's going to be the most embarrassing thing ever. ואתה תהיה כאחד הנבלים בישראל. And you will be like one of those people who are a disgrace for the Jewish people. ואתה דבר נא אל המלך, כי לא ימנעני ממך. And now speak to the king, he will not prevent me from being your wife, because we are only half a brother sister, and in ancient times we could have get married. So there is a way. Let's get married. I'm okay with it. ולא אהבה לשמוע בקולה. He didn't listen to her. ויחזק ממנה. What does it mean, ויחזק ממנה? These two words describe a struggle. Don't forget, he starts with grabbing her arm or her wrist or whatever it was. She's talking to him, he doesn't listen. And then ויחזק ממנה, which means it seems to be that there was a struggle, but she was weaker than him. So he became stronger than her. ויעניה, and he afflicted her. וישכב אותה, and he slept with her. Which, by the way, you see that the sequence and the order of the verbs are very different than Shchem and Dina. The story is different. This is a definite story of rape. There are no any other explanations. Amnon is raping Tamar because she offered him, marry me. You can marry me. He did not want it. He wanted to sleep with her and that's it. And how do I know that? ויקרא את נערו משרתו, Amnon calls his servant, ויאמר שילחו נא את זאת מעלי החוצה, ונעול הדלת אחריה. This is a horrible description, but so clear. Amnon, after he did what he did, after he raped his half-sister, Tamar, he called his servant and says, take out this girl. Doesn't even call her by name. Close the door, lock the door, she's out. He doesn't want to marry her. He doesn't want to be with her. He just wanted to rape her, and that's it. That's the end of the story from Amnon's perspective. ועליה כתונת פסים, and Tamar wore a beautiful garment, כי כן תלבשנה בנות המלך הבתולות מעילים, because that's the way that the daughters of the kings who were not married yet will put this beautiful garment, ויוצא אותה משרתו החוץ ונעל הדלת אחריה. So the servant did what Amnon told him. He took her and he asked her to leave the room. ותיקח תמר אפר על ראשה. Tamar took ashes, put it on her head. וכתונת הפסים אשר עליה קרעה. She tore apart her garment. ותשם ידה על ראשה. She put hands on her head. ותלך הלוך וזעקה. And she went out and she just yelled and screamed and cried. Why did I bring that story? I would like to suggest this story is a story of rape, no question. The only one to blame is Amnon. Amnon is the villain. He is the wicked person in that story. Tamar is a lovely girl that was put in a place. She was sent to a place and she was raped. She offered to marry him. She offered that they will get married. He didn't listen. He wanted to rape her. And the minute he raped her, after he raped her, he just sent her away. Go home. The story with Shchem and Dina is very different. I asked one of the first questions is, what about Dina? The Midrash, I didn't bring it here, but the Midrash says that Dina considered to marry Shchem. To marry your rapist? Answer is, it might be that it was not rape. So what was it? I don't know. But it might be like in the ancient times, there was no marriage, there was no chuppah, there was a relationship between the men and the women, and then they will decide that they get married. Again, there is a word of vayanea, which means that he afflicted her. So definitely there was a forceful act there with Shchem. I'm not making Shchem, God forbid, a tzaddik. Righteous person is definitely not. Question is, was he a rapist? When you compare it to this story, I'm not sure. He might be. He definitely did something that he shouldn't do, that he shouldn't have done. But it's definitely not Amnon and Tamar. So what I would like to suggest is perhaps, especially if, you know what, maybe I'll go back to the first narrative. We said the third verse, Gimel, ותדבק נפשו בדינה בת יעקב, his soul. Maybe at the beginning it was all physical. But then he saw that this girl is special. This young lady is a lady, is a Dina bat Yaakov. She has lineage, she comes from a wonderful family. She herself is a very strong woman. And how do I know? Because God himself says to Yaakov, according to the Midrash, you prevented kindness from Esav. Dina had the power to change Esav. She might have the power to change Shchem. Maybe Shchem saw in Dina what Yaakov himself did not see in Dina. Shchem saw this powerful young lady that can change him, his tribe, the region. He was at the beginning in awe of her beauty, her external beauty, but then he was amazed by her inner beauty. And he wanted to marry her. Not just to have relationships with her, but to be with her. His nefesh was attached to Dina. Unlike Amnon and Tamar, Amnon was not interested in what Tamar has to say. He was not interested in what Tamar has to express in her inner beauty. He was just interested in one thing, in an act with her. That's it. Shchem was not like that. Again, not that Shchem was a righteous person. He still says vayanea, and he afflicted her. But the sequence of events, the order of the verbs, ויקח אותה, וישכב אותה, and then קח לי את הילדה הזאת לאישה, I want to marry her, maybe brings a different light on that narrative. So in conclusion, this shiur is a complicated one. It's a little hard to digest. because in a way there is a blame that is thrown, especially towards the end, on Dina. But we try to say that we need to look at it through the prism and through the lenses of the time, the environment, the other cultures, but also, to some extent, to some kind of a lesson. And I would like to suggest to take maybe one very strong lesson that maybe Yaakov was criticized for, which was, Yaakov did not believe in Dina. Dina, we don't know much about her. This is the story about Dina. But Dina had tremendous power. She could have changed Esav, according to this midrash. This is a powerful lady that can take an ish side, to take Esav, and to make him part of the Jewish people. So this story, I think, as enigmatic as it is, and as complicated as it is, just I think bring many, many questions. Many questions of how to read the narrative, how to read it when we compare it to Amnon and Tamar, and even to ask a question. Is the question of who to blame is a real question? Is that a question that we need to ask? What are the other lessons that we can learn and derive from this narrative? This will be a little bit of homework for all of us until next week. Thank you.